So today we're going to be learning about fractions, folding shapes into 2 equal parts, halves, then 4 equal parts, quarters/fourths. We'll be using food items, roti, chocolate to explain sharing. We'll practice shading 1/2 and 1/4. Introductory question. How much roti does each person get if we cut it into halves? What about if we cut it into fourths/quarters? Introduction to halves and fourths. Halves and fourths are common ways to divide different things. For example, we can divide a piece of roti into halves or fourths. So we're going to go back to this introductory question and explain how this works. So a half and a fourth are examples of fractions. Basically, a fraction, it represents division. So let's say we have a piece of roti. So we're going to draw this roti and we cut it into halves. That means we have 2 equal parts. So each half is an equal part, and since we're doing halves, so 1/2, that means there's 2 equal parts. So this would be a half, this would be a half. Now what if we cut it into fourths with 4 equal parts? Each one would be a fourth or a quarter, which is 1 out of 4 basically. So if there's 4 equal parts, each one of these 4 equal parts is a quarter or a fourth. So basically, we're going to be learning about this today, these fractions, and how these divisions work. So halves. If you divide something into halves, you'll have 2 equal parts. If you divide something into fourths, you'll have 4 equal parts. Let's try it. Fractions. Fractions represent this division. 1/2 is a half. 1/4 is a fourth. So right here, 1/2, this means 1/2, basically. 1/4 here, that is a fourth. You can also have different fractions. So you can have infinite number of fractions. So you can have 1/5, which means 1/5. It means a fifth. Let's say you have 1/4 of a roti. Imagine dividing a roti into 4 equal parts, and then you get 1 part. So as we went over before, if we have this roti, and we divide into 4 equal parts, then each part would be 1/4. So let's say you have 3 friends, and each friend gets 1/4, and you get 1/4 of the roti. Okay, so now let's do some practice to get more familiar with fractions. Take a piece of paper, fold it once in the middle. Do we get halves or fourths? So let's imagine this is a piece of paper. So fold it down the middle, and then tell me, do we get halves or fourths? I'll give you guys a few minutes. So try to figure this out, then in a couple minutes we'll go over it. If we cut this paper, if we divide it into halves by folding it, if we fold it into across the middle, what fraction will we get? Okay, so now we'll go over this. So here, in this case, you would get 1 half because there are 2 equal parts. So that means we have 1 half. Now what if we folded this paper again? So now we fold it once, now we fold it twice. What fraction would each of these boxes be? It's not drawn properly, but assume that each box is equal size. What fraction would each one be? I'll give you guys a couple minutes and then we'll go over the answer. Okay, now we'll go over the answer. So since we have 4 equal parts here, 1, 2, 3, 4, each one would be 1/4 because there's 4 equal parts, so there's 4 here. Each one would be 1/4. So now we can see how how these basic fractions work. So like 1/4 is 1/4 of something, a quarter of something. So if there's something divided into 4 equal parts, 1/4 equals 1 part. And they must be equal parts. Each part must be equal. So now let's do another exercise to understand how these fractions work. Which is bigger, 1/2 or 1/4? Which is a larger number? So which number is greater, 1/2 or 1/4? So note down your answers and then we'll go over it. So in 1 more minute, we'll go over this. Please solve this question in your notebooks so that when we give the answer, you guys understand. Okay, now let's go over it. So 1/2 is the greater number. So you might think that 1/4 is the greater number because 4 is greater than 2. But in this case, this doesn't matter. What matters actually is that 2 is less than 4 because since the numerator is the same, the denominator matters. The top part of a fraction, so the top part of the fraction, 1, here in this case, is called numerator. Numerator, okay? The bottom part is denominator. So when the numerator is the same, we look at the denominator. So in this case, 1 is the same thing as 1. So let's say we have 2 papers and we divide them, right? So one of them is divided into 4 halves, one is fourths. So which one is larger, this half or this fourth? Obviously this half is larger, right? But that's because this paper, even though the papers are equal size, since this has less parts, each part is bigger. So if there's 2 parts, each part is going to be bigger. So let's say you have 100 parts. Each part is going to be very small, right? But if you have 2 parts, each part will be bigger than if you have 100 parts. So that's why if the denominator is smaller, that means the fraction is larger. So 1/2 is greater than 1/4. Okay? because if we have a half, let's say this paper, let's say we have a line here, and this line is 10 meters. That's it. No, let's do 4 meters. Okay, this line is 4 meters. Okay, so 1/2 would be right around here, right? So each side would be 2 meters equals 1/2. Okay, but what if we do 1/4? That means we would have 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, 1/4. And each 1/4 is 1 meter. So you see when we're doing 1/4, there's more parts. So each part is smaller. In this case, each part is 1 meter. But when doing 1/2, it's 2 meters. Okay? So that's why 1/2 is greater than 1/4. Let's do one more thing. When we're taking 4 meters and we're taking 1/2, 1/2 of 4 meters, we can find this by doing 4 divided by 2. And 4 divided by 2 equals 2. So that's how I got 2, okay? But we don't need to know that for now. For now, we're not doing division this class. We're just going to be doing these fractions. So in fractions, the number on the bottom is called the denominator and the number on the top is called the numerator. If the numerator gets larger, the fraction is a bigger number. So let's say you have 1/4 and you have 3/4. Now we don't need to know what 3/4 represents. This is just an example. But if the numerator is larger and the denominator is the same, that means this fraction is larger. But if okay, that's not a great way to explain it. Let me reword that. Ignore what I just said. Let's say you have 1/4. If the numerator goes up, that means the value of the fraction goes up. It becomes a greater fraction. If the denominator goes up, that means it becomes a lower value. So let's say you add, let's say 1/4, we have, let's say 1/4, 1 goes up. Let's say we increase it by 1. That means this fraction will become larger. If we increase the denominator, that means this fraction will become smaller. Okay? So if you increase the numerator, the fraction is a bigger number. So when the numerator gets larger, fraction is a bigger number. When the denominator gets larger, the fraction is a smaller number. We'll learn more about these numerators later on, so don't get too confused. Don't worry about these numerators. Today we're just doing 1/2 versus 1/4. I just wanted to include this, but don't worry about these numerators, okay? Let's do some practice. For all of these ones, we're going to have the same numerator, okay? So which one is greater, 1/2 or 1/4? So do all 3 of these problems, and then we'll go over them. So solve all three problems, and then we'll go over them. So if you finish the first one, we'll go to the next one. Okay, so now we will go over these questions, okay? So which one is greater, 1/2 or 1/4? So we already went over this, but 1/2 is greater than 1/4 because this numerator is smaller. Because when this numerator gets larger, the fraction gets smaller because there's more parts, so the parts are smaller. So 1/4 or 1/8. The numerators are equal, so we have to look at the denominators. 4 is less than 8, so that means since the numerator is lower, this fraction is larger. So 1/4 is larger. 1/3 or 1/5. Since 3 is less than 5, 1/3 is the bigger fraction. Now, we don't have, these are just examples. You guys don't have to visualize 1/5 or 1/3 yet. In today's class, we're only focusing on 1/2 or 1/4. This is just for you guys to understand which fraction is greater. So, but for today's class, we have to know and visualize 1/2 and 1/4. But numerators and 1/8, 1/3, 1/5, those are just extra stuff. You guys don't have to worry about them. So don't worry about numerators, don't worry about this stuff. These are just examples to help us understand the other stuff, okay? Now explain it. Write down your own definition of fractions. Describe halves and fourths. So write down a definition in your notebook because writing your own definitions can help you learn. And if you need help with your definition, you can go back in the video and see the earlier parts. So once we have written that definition, we'll move on. Sharing. Fractions can be used to share. So if you have an orange and you are with your friend, you should share the orange, right? So we should share with our friends. So let's say you have one friend. So this is your friend. This is you. So since you have you and your friend, that's 2 people. So since you have 2 people, you want to cut the orange into 2 equal parts, right? So 1 equal part for both of you. So how should we do that? That means we should cut it into halves. So let's say this is orange. We should cut it so each person gets 1/2. Okay? Since it's you and your friend. So if you have one friend to share with, how should you cut the apple? We already did this basically, but if you had one friend, that would be 2 people, 2 equal parts. So 1/2. Okay? So what if you had 3 friends and you want to share your roti? How would you do that? Think about that for a second. So if you had 3 friends, 1 friend, yourself, 1 plus 3 friends equals 4 people. So if you have 4 people, you want to divide into 4 equal parts. Because each person wants an equal part, right? So because of that, we have to divide the roti into 1/4. Each part into the fourths. So each person will get 1/4. So maybe you will get this, one friend will get this, next friend will get this, and the other friend will get this. So you would divide it into fourths or quarters. Fourths and quarters are the same thing, okay? Quarters, Quarters, they are the same thing. They both equal 1/4, okay? 1/4. So now we're going to move on to our homework. Which is greater, 1/4 or 1/9, 1/4 or 1/9? And how should you divide a chocolate bar if you have 2 friends to share with? So I'm going to say the answers to the homework now. If you don't want to hear these 2 answers, don't pause the video so you can do the homework and then you can come back to see the answers. Your other homework is to draw a circle, then color in half of the circle. So 1/2. Then draw a square and then color in 1/4 of the square. So now I'll give the answer for these two problems. Pause the video if you don't want to see the answer, and if you want to do the problem and then later and then come back and see the answer. So this one will be 1/3. This will be 1/4 because since the numerator is smaller here, that means since the numerator is the same and the denominator is smaller, 1/4 is larger. And for this one, 2 friends plus yourself is 3 people. So 3 equal parts, 1/3. So to summarize, these are what fractions are. I have one more quick note to do not worry about 1/9, 1/5, 1/3. These were just examples to help us understand which fractions are greater. Today's focus was mostly on 1/2 and 1/4, so you don't need to visualize these ones. And don't worry too much on numerator. Numerator also affects how large a fraction is, but we'll learn more about the numerator later and more about fractions later. Today we're just understanding 1/2 and 1/4. So don't worry too much. Just understand that the numerator is the number on top and the denominator is the number on the bottom. Okay, so that is it for today, and